Hey, did you think that your serger is only used for finishing seams and that's about it, or making table linens? Wrong. You can actually do some quilt piecing with your serger. So welcome to this edition of the So Creative Club. And this month we're going to be talking about piecing with your serger. And as you can see, it's pieced on the back using a serger. It's good, strong seam, and is perfect for quilting. So let's get started. And you know, the first thing we need to do is how to establish that 1/4 inch seam with your serger, because as you know, there are no line markings, no seam markings on your serger, and if you move your blade, any markings you've made are probably inaccurate. So let's go to the serger, and first of all, let's determine how to determine that 1/4 inch seam. Okay, the first thing we have to overcome when quilting with a serger is that we have to be able to sew that accurate 1/4 inch seam. So it's hard to determine what is a 1/4 inch seam on your serger until you try it out. What I recommend is that you take your fabric and draw your 1/4 inch seam onto it, at least the first time you do it. And you see these little lines on I'm using the clear foot, and see, I've darkened my lines, and these lines are right in front of the needle. And right now I'm using a 3-thread narrow, which means I am using this needle, which is in this position. So I want to cover up that line that I drew with the line on the serger. And I'll lower my presser foot, and I don't quite have it there. Right there. And what you want to note is, where does this fabric fall? You can just eyeball it, or if you like, you can put a piece of highlighting tape or painter's tape right along this edge to guide your fabric, because you want an accurate seam. Okay, now I've marked the guideline for the 1/4 inch seam, and I'm going to just simply stitch so that the edge of my fabric is right along the edge of this seam. And it should give me a nice 1/4 inch seam. Okay, I started out with 1.5 inch strips, and when I press it open, I should have 2.5 inch strips if I've got an accurate 1/4 inch seam. So if I mark it, let's check it on the ruler, and let's see, it is right at 2.5 inches, so it's fairly accurate. So now I'm ready to sew my strips together. And you want to sew always from the same end. I usually start at the selvage, where the selvage is more prominent. Just make them all go that way, because we're going to trim all that off at the end anyway. You want to make sure your differential feed is at neutral. You don't want to gather this up. You don't want to pull on the strips. Just lightly sew them. I'll sew this off camera. I'm going to sew them in order of light to dark, the whole strip, from selvage to selvage, 1 1/2 inches. So I'm not going to worry about the selvages right now. I'm just going to simply sew these together with a 1/4 inch seam, a little bit shorter stitch length. Could press this as I go along, but I think I will wait and do it all at one time. Okay, now I've sewn all 5 of these together on the strata, and now I'm going to press them towards the dark. So I'm going to start on this light side, press it flat, and open it up and press it towards just let the iron do the work. You don't want to do this number with it. You don't want to do this. You just want to let the flat part of the iron press it open. Press this seam towards the darker of the fabrics. Okay, when I finish that row, take the next one, press it flat. And you don't want to use steam. Now, I'm not opposed to pressing with steam, but I don't normally use it in an iron. I will use a mist after it's all good and pressed open. Then I will give it a good crisp press by just spritzing it with a mister, and then pressing it again. That'll make it be really nice and flat. Okay, third row. Almost one more to go. And then press it finally open. Okay. This should measure 5.5 inches. Let's see. Okay. And turn it over. It's a slightly shy of 2.5 inches. I mean 5.5 inches. So that's where it might get a little bit flatter and longer if I missed it some. So I'm going to just spray it a little bit. And pull it and press it towards the dark. This section. Now it's nice and flat. Now the trick if you're going to use steam is don't touch this till it's dry and cold. Okay, now it is. Over here. I'm out of camera, sorry. I'm going to mist it. And just let that roll. And the last little bit here. Okay, and now that I've pressed it, I'm going to let that, don't move it until, and it is pretty much 5.5 inches wide. So next we're going to go to the cutting table and subcut this into 5.5 inch squares. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to square up the end where it's got all these selvage bits. So I'm going to line, and actually it's turning out to be 5 and say 3/8 instead of 5.5 inches wide. So if this is 5 3/8 inches wide, which meant I took a little bit too big of a bite here and there with that serger, so I need to move that line over just a little bit more so that I take a more accurate 1/4 inch seam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first square it up. So I'm taking a seam line and following this line on the ruler and just square it up. Square up one end. Okay. I'm right-handed. Sometimes it helps to have a rotating board, but I don't have one down here today. So I'm going to take this at 5 3/8. Again, I'm going to make sure that I'm going straight across. 1. And 2. Follow that line. 2. and 3. And I don't quite have enough for a 4th one. So I'm going to go make another strata. Okay, now we've got all of our blocks cut into 5" or 5 1/4, about 5 3/8 inch square. So now I'm going to arrange them, and I can arrange them now in the pinwheel. You can put either the lights in the center, or turn them around and put the darks in the center, or you can turn it around and put the lights in the center. Whichever way you like, the way you like it. Whichever way you want to. You can put either the lights in the center. Actually, I kind of like the darks in the center. But anyway, what I would do is now I would sew these together and sew these two together. So I'll do that on the serger using the same 1/4 inch seam. Okay? Okay, I've sewn these 2 halves together and these 2 together, and now I'm going to match up this center seam, and it should nest, because when you press these, you're going to press these towards the dark. So it's pressed towards the dark side. So now the only seam you have to match up is going to be this center seam, and it should nest together. And now I'm going to sew this, and the block will be finished. Okay, the block is finished. Let me find here. Okay, here's the block is finished, and you can see on the back it's been, and then I'm going to press all the seams to one side. I just need to straighten out the seams on the back because there's a few little twisted ones. Then I'll probably give it a good spray starching, let it dry, and it's ready to go into a quilt. Okay, this quilt block is finished. As you can see, it's done with a serger. It's ready to be put into your quilt, or as a tote bag, or a pillow, or anything you like. So, see, I told you, you could do some quilting and piecing with your serger.